In the bitter cold of Harvard Yard, a poor student picks up empty cans with his left hand and writes a thesis about the meaning of numbers with his right. 2 o'clock in the morning. Snow fell thin as paper ash, dusting the grass, the red brick paths, the steps of Widener Library gone dark. The oak trunks stood in silence, black and heavy, as if witnesses to centuries. In the middle of that vast yard, Micah Cole bent down to pick up a crushed aluminum can and dropped it into a cloth bag. The bag rattled, each sound like a coin rolling through his impoverished childhood. His breath came white into the night air. In his other arm, he still held a notebook, the cover worn to its edges. Micah was 19, a freshman at Harvard College. He came from a hollow in McDowell County, West Virginia, where sagging wooden houses leaned against the hills and the smell of coal clung to every meal. His mother, Lena Cole, had died the spring before of illness. Since that day, Micah had carried a notebook as though it were a dim lantern, filling its pages with reflections on mathematics and life, on the numbers his mother once taught him to count with bottle caps at the kitchen table. That night he chose the oak tree near Memorial Church, leaning against its trunk to cut the wind. He set the notebook on his knees. The ink, sluggish from the cold, still managed to flow. The lines appeared steady and slow. His thesis bore the title, Numbers as Promise. He began with a simple yet strange question for a freshman. How do human beings seek meaning in numbers? Micah wrote that numbers did not merely count objects. They counted longing, counted winters, counted the trembling beats of the heart when one faced the unknown. Mathematics, then, was not a mirror of ice. It was a hearth. Its fire burned with discipline, with definitions, with axioms, but it gave warmth through the faith that the world could be understood. He filled the page with terms he had first discovered in battered library books back home. The Peano axioms, building the natural numbers from one and the successor function. Dedekind cuts, carving the real numbers out of gaps between rationals. The Zermelo-Frankel axioms, with choice, scaffolding the vast architecture of set theory, reducing complexity to a few primal bricks. He wrote about the three great philosophies of mathematics: logicism, which sought to reduce arithmetic to pure logic; formalism, which stressed the symbolic game and internal consistency; intuitionism, demanding that mathematical objects be constructible in the mind. Micah did not pledge allegiance to any camp. He wrote in the voice of someone who had sat beside his mother, counting coins at day's end, and learned that meaning did not lie in the objects themselves, but in the relationships between people. He paused to rub warmth back into his fingers. Wind poured across the yard like a river of ice. From afar, Lamont Library glowed faintly. Micah thought of the problem that had haunted him for years: the Riemann hypothesis. He scribbled notes in the margin. The Riemann zeta function, defined first by an infinite series and extended analytically, possessed mysterious zeros. The conjecture declared that every non-trivial zero had real part 1/2. If true, the primes, those seemingly random sentinels of arithmetic, would be shown to follow a hidden rhythm. He explained it to himself as though speaking to an elder by a fire. One need not see the formulas to feel the spirit of it. Like hearing rain strike a tin roof, one knows there is rhythm beneath the noise. The Riemann hypothesis said that in the chaos of rain there lies a central beat. The line 1/2 is the lifeline, where all secret harmonies converge. Micah set down the pen. In memory, he heard his mother's dry, racking cough. Back then, he had written a tiny note on the back cover of a school notebook. If one day I understand why numbers make people less lonely, I will tell you. Tonight, he wrote to keep that promise. Footsteps crunched behind him. Micah startled. A figure approached, scarf trailing. The woman stopped, her gaze lingering on the torn cloth bag, cans glinting inside. "You are still out here? In this cold?" Her voice was husky, carried by the wind. "Sorry, I'll pack up right away." Micah stood quickly, clutching the bag. Her eyes moved to the notebook. "What are you writing?" "A thesis for my philosophy of mathematics class, ma'am." He hesitated. "I just needed the quiet." She nodded, sharp but not unkind. "I'm Helena Morse, teach in Emerson Hall. I've seen you in lecture, but I don't recall your name." "Micah Cole, ma'am." She gestured to the notebook. "May I look?" Micah handed it over. She turned the thin pages, stopping at the section on the 3 schools of thought, then at the note on the Riemann hypothesis. A faint smile touched her lips. "You write as if your hand is shivering from cold, yet the lines never stray." Micah flushed. "I'm sorry for the messy script." "No." She shook her head. "There's something here. You explain meaning with images from life. You keep rhythm. You let the reader breathe. You turn hard knowledge into fire." A short whistle broke in, the campus security guard approaching. He stopped, eyeing the bag of cans and Micah's worn student ID sticking out from the notebook. "It's late. You can't stay here with that bag." Micah fumbled for words. "I just wanted to finish this section. I'm sorry." Helena intervened. "He is my student. I asked him to find a quiet place. I'll take responsibility." The guard studied her. Recognizing a senior professor, he softened. "All right, but clear out before 3. And keep warm." When he left, Helena returned the notebook. "You do this to make ends meet, don't you?" "Yes. Each can is worth a few cents. I clean tables at Annenberg, sweep classrooms at Science Center, then collect cans. I'm fine. Night is when my thoughts are clearest." She pulled off her wool gloves, placing them in his hands. "I have another pair. Take these. Warm hands write better." "I can't accept." "You can. Pay me back with a page tomorrow morning. 1 page. Explain to me why a man living in poverty should still care about Gödel's theorems. No symbols necessary, just meaning." Micah looked down at the gloves, the wool brushing his skin like a benediction. He remembered Gödel's proof that in any system strong enough to contain arithmetic, there would be true statements unprovable within it. The thought humbled and freed him. Knowledge always left unopened rooms. "I'll write it, ma'am," he whispered. "Good. Tomorrow, 6:30, on Widener's steps. I'll bring coffee. You bring a page." Her footsteps faded into snow. Micah sat back down, heart pounding, not from cold but from faith renewed. He turned to a fresh page, writing of Gödel as though to his mother. "We will never know everything. But that means we are invited to keep asking, to keep believing." He remembered the nights at home when his mother counted bottle caps to teach him addition. "Each cap is a day of labor," she said. "You count not to boast, but to know what is owed." As he grew older, Micah realized mathematics also carried a debt to truth. Every definition was a promise to hold a word steady. Every theorem, a promise never to betray the trust of its reader. Morning came pale over Harvard Yard. Micah stood at Widener's steps on time. Helena arrived, 2 cups in hand. "No sugar. Black coffee sharpens the ear for small truths. Do you have your page?" Micah handed her his writing. The gloves had steadied his pen. "I wrote that Gödel's incompleteness is like farming poor soil. No matter how hard you work, some seeds will not sprout. Not because you failed, but because the ground holds depths your eyes cannot reach. It keeps us humble. It bends our minds before reality." Helena read slowly. She looked up. "You chose the right image, and you did not hide your sorrow. You wrote that loss makes us fear the unprovable, but loss also teaches us to believe in what cannot be seen." Micah said nothing. They stood together, watching students hurry across the yard. Helena spoke again. Would you join my small reading group, Thursday evenings? We read Frege, Hilbert, and later Wittgenstein. You needn't speak much, just come. And if you like, read aloud one page of your own. I would like that, Micah said. She nodded. Harvard can be grand and it can be cold, but if you keep your hearth inside, you will walk through it. That evening, Micah returned to the oak. He no longer collected cans. He opened his notebook and wrote of meaning again, of how numbers became steps by which people climbed out of their valleys. He wrote of West Virginia without self-pity, of coal dust and rain on tin roofs, of children running barefoot. He wrote that though theorems did not fill the stomach, they fed resolve. They gave shape, a frame in which broken pieces of life could be set together. Before closing his notebook, Micah wrote one last line. Numbers are a promise that the world can be understood, though never completely. And because of that, people can forgive one another, for all of us are groping inside an unfinished system. He blew out his small candle. Snow had ceased. The sky thinned to pencil gray. Micah walked away, his bag lighter, but within his chest he felt the warmth of a hearth beginning to burn, and he knew that from this frozen night, his story had begun to move in the right direction. Evening settled over Harvard Yard with a brittle wind that rattled the branches. Students hurried across the yard in heavy coats, scarves wrapped high, eyes lowered against the cold. Micah stood at the steps of Emerson Hall, the stone walls rising above him, and pressed his gloved hands together as if in prayer. Helena's gloves still carried the faint smell of wool and chalk. He took a slow breath and stepped inside. The reading group met in a small room on the second floor. The wood-paneled walls glowed under amber lamps. A long oak table stretched the length of the room, its surface worn smooth by generations of elbows and notebooks. Around it sat 5 students, all older than Micah, and a guest lecturer from the philosophy department. At the head of the table, Helena adjusted her notes with practiced calm. Micah chose a seat near the corner, notebook on his lap. He felt like a visitor from another world. The others wore thick sweaters, sleek coats folded over the backs of their chairs. Their voices carried ease, practiced in debate. He kept silent, listening as Helena opened the session. Tonight we read from Hilbert's address in 1900, she said. The 23 problems that challenged the century. Hilbert believed mathematics could be made whole, that every true statement could be proved, every question given an answer. A grand cathedral of certainty. She lifted her gaze. Of course, Gödel would later prove otherwise, but the dream itself still matters. Richard Alden sat directly across from Micah. His family name was carved into a plaque in one of the newer libraries. He carried himself with the confidence of inheritance, tweed jacket, gold pen laid deliberately on the table. He noticed Micah's worn notebook, its edges frayed. A shadow of a smile crossed his lips. Helena invited Richard to begin. He read aloud a passage from Hilbert's introduction, his voice sonorous, almost theatrical. When he finished, he leaned back, satisfied. Hilbert's optimism, he declared, is a relic. Charming, perhaps, but naive. To believe mathematics could be completed is to misunderstand its depth. Gödel's incompleteness destroyed that illusion. A murmur of assent circled the table. Helena's eyes shifted to Micah. Would you like to read next? Micah's pulse quickened. He opened his notebook, fingers brushing the wool gloves. He began quietly, almost to himself. Hilbert said, "We must know, we will know." To him, the future of mathematics was not darkness, but an undiscovered country. He dreamed of a structure where no crack was left unsealed. Micah lifted his eyes. I come from land that is rocky, poor for farming. Yet farmers still plow. They know many seeds will not take root, but they plow anyway, hoping for the few that will. Hilbert's dream feels like that to me. Not foolish, hopeful. Even if the ground refuses some seeds, the act of sowing is what keeps a family alive. Silence filled the room. The guest lecturer adjusted his glasses. Richard broke it with a laugh, sharp as glass. Tell me, Cole, do you think a boy picking cans in the yard is qualified to lecture us on Hilbert? This isn't Sunday sermon for farmers. It is mathematics. The words landed like a blow. Micah lowered his eyes. His hand tightened on the notebook, but he did not answer. Helena's voice cut the air, calm yet firm. Enough, Richard. What you dismiss as sermon is precisely what philosophy of mathematics requires. The ability to find meaning, not merely recite definitions. Hilbert's program was not a ledger of dry problems. It was an act of faith. Richard bristled but said nothing. The others shifted uneasily, their faces unreadable. Helena leaned toward Micah. Would you continue? Micah drew a breath. Hilbert's program sought to ground mathematics in a finite, complete system. It was a noble vision. Gödel showed that such a foundation is impossible. Yet impossibility does not erase value. The plow still cuts the earth, though stones lie beneath. The furrows left behind can still hold seed. The guest lecturer nodded. Well put. There is depth in recognizing the persistence of the plow, even in stony ground. Micah closed his notebook. His thoughts slipped back to McDowell County. The ridgelines veiled in fog, the soil thin and reluctant. He remembered his mother bent over a small garden, coaxing tomatoes from earth that yielded grudgingly. She would smile at every fruit, no matter how small, as if it were proof that hope could be harvested. Hilbert's dream was like that smile, fragile, defiant, luminous against hardship. When the session ended, students gathered coats and spoke in low voices. Richard left quickly, his shoes clicking sharp against the wooden floor. Helena remained, stacking her notes. She looked at Micah. You faced your first test tonight. There will be others. Do not waste energy on insult. Use it as kindling. Micah hesitated. Do you think I belong here, Professor? Her gaze softened. Belonging is not granted by birth, Micah. It is earned by fire. You have already begun. Hilbert dreamed of certainty, and Gödel revealed its limits. You will live in that space between, where questions are sharper than answers. That is where you belong. Micah felt warmth rise in his chest, deeper than the wool gloves could give. He stepped back into the night. The wind still cut across the yard, but he no longer felt hollow. In his notebook, Hilbert's words echoed beside his own. We must know, we will know. To Micah, it was not arrogance, but an oath, a promise that plowing the barren ground of knowledge was still worth every breath. Snow swirled under the lanterns. Micah walked slowly, each step firm. He thought of his mother's hands pressing soil around a fragile stem, and he whispered into the night, We must sow. We will sow. The midterm season descended on Harvard like an iron bell. The yard, once hushed under snow, now pulsed with tension. Library lights burned late, corridors hummed with footsteps, and pages rustled like anxious whispers. For Micah, the weight was doubled. Examinations loomed, but so did the empty pockets of his coat. Rent for the cramped room he shared off campus was overdue, and his part-time jobs barely covered meals. The bag of cans grew heavier each night. He sat at a desk in Widener, a cavernous room lined with books that seemed to press inward. Before him, problem sets in linear algebra and real analysis stretched across the page, neat matrices and proofs staring back like indifferent judges. Micah steadied his pen. His body was tired, but his mind would not surrender. He thought of his mother's voice. You can be poor in pocket, but never poor in thought. The exam for real analysis was held in a lecture hall that smelled of chalk dust and winter coats. Students filed in, carrying confidence or concealed panic. Micah sat in the second row, notebook ready. The professor, Dr. Levin, placed the test face down on each desk. When the signal was given, Micah turned the sheet and felt his chest tighten. The first problem asked for a proof of uniform convergence in a sequence of functions, then to connect it with the interchange of limits and integration. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then wrote carefully, unfolding the logic step by step, aware of the minutes dripping away. The rhythm steadied him. Inequality, the careful passage of limits. By the time he reached the end, the argument felt like a path cleared through snow. But the second problem was different. It asked for a counterexample to show that point-wise convergence does not guarantee continuity. Micah hesitated. His mind flickered back to a book he had read under dim light in the public library back home. He remembered the classic example. A sequence of functions that seemed smooth at first, but in the limit became jagged, breaking continuity at a single point. He wrote it down, hand shaking with relief. The exam lasted 3 hours. When it ended, students poured out into the yard. Some laughed, others muttered. Micah walked slowly, feeling both drained and alive. The cold wind on his face was almost welcome. He had fought through the storm, yet storms followed him home. The landlord, a stern man with spectacles slipping down his nose, met Micah at the door. "Rent is late again," he said flatly. "I can't carry you." "I'll have it in a week," Micah promised. His voice was low. "I'm picking up extra shifts." "You said that last week." The landlord sighed. "If it's not here by Friday, I need the room back." That night, Micah sat by the window, snow drifting beyond the glass. His notebook open but blank. Hunger gnawed at him, but worse was the thought of losing shelter. He pressed the wool gloves to his face, the only gift in this city that felt like it was his own. He whispered into the silence, "I will not leave. Not yet." The next evening, Helena found him again. He was sweeping a classroom, chalk dust coating his sleeves. She watched quietly before speaking. "You look worn thin." "I'm fine," he said, though his voice betrayed the strain. "I need to keep up with classes. The exams, they matter." She stepped closer. "Exams measure skill. Life measures fire. Which are you feeding?" Micah lowered his eyes. "Sometimes I fear I'm feeding neither, just chasing coins." Helena studied him. "Come to my office tomorrow. I want to show you something." The next day, her office smelled of old paper and strong coffee. On her desk lay a copy of Hilbert's collected works. She opened it to a page where Hilbert had once written his conviction. "There is no ignorabimus in mathematics." Helena tapped the line. Hilbert believed nothing should remain forever unknowable. You must believe the same about yourself. Poverty, exhaustion, they are not the end. They are conditions, not destiny. Micah touched the page, the ink stark against the yellowing paper. His voice trembled. "But even Hilbert's program failed. Gödel showed the cracks." "Failure does not erase vision," Helena replied. "Even broken ground can yield. You are proof of that. Do not confuse incompleteness with hopelessness." He left her office lighter, though the burden of debt still clung. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "A theorem unfinished is still a path. My life is also unfinished, and that is why it can still change." Friday came quickly. The landlord's ultimatum pressed like iron. Micah worked 2 shifts back-to-back, cleaning tables until his knuckles ached, sweeping until his back bent. He counted the coins late into the night, still short. He sat on the floor, hands buried in the wool gloves, and prayed to numbers as though they were saints. Every proof he had ever written was a kind of prayer, to show that from assumptions one could arrive at truth. At dawn, he carried the coins to the landlord, adding a crumpled bill. It was not enough. The man shook his head. "I'm sorry." Micah walked back into the yard, the morning sun slicing through the cold. He sat beneath the oak where his journey had begun. The campus stirred awake around him. His breath rose white. For the first time since arriving, he felt the edges of despair. Yet even as tears welled, he opened his notebook. On the blank page, he wrote slowly, "If continuity can break, still the limit exists. If a home can vanish, still knowledge shelters me. I will not stop." The page blurred as his vision swam, but the words remained, and Micah knew the test of Harvard was not in proofs or grades. It was in surviving the void and refusing to let the flame go out. Spring thawed Harvard Yard slowly. Snow receded in patches, leaving wet grass and dark mud. Students carried lighter coats now, laughter echoing across the steps of Widener. For many, spring meant relief. For Micah, it brought a harsher light that revealed cracks he could no longer conceal. The eviction notice arrived folded under his door. The landlord had not waited another week. Micah stood in the dim room, staring at the paper as though it were a theorem he could disprove. But no counterexample came. He packed his few possessions into a single duffel, 2 shirts, 1 coat, the wool gloves, and the notebook. By dusk, he was gone. For several nights, Micah slept in the library, slumped in corners until security asked him to move. He tried the chapel pews, the basement of a science building, even the chilled stillness of a stairwell. The city outside pulsed with warmth he could not touch. Yet every evening he returned to his notebook, as though the act of writing kept his mind alive even while his body faltered. One evening Helena found him in the yard, sitting under the oak though the ground was damp. She saw the hollow eyes, the thinner frame. "Where are you staying?" she asked. Micah hesitated. "Here and there." Her expression darkened. "You cannot study on an empty stomach, Micah. Nor can you fight proofs without rest." He smiled faintly. "I can try." Helena pressed. "You must tell me the truth." The words caught in his throat. Finally he whispered, "I lost the room. I'm fine. Please don't say anything to the administration. If they think I cannot manage, they will send me back. I cannot go back." Her silence was long. Then she said softly, "There is a couch in my office. You will use it until we find a way. Promise me." Micah shook his head. "I can't burden you." "Burden?" Helena's eyes sharpened. "What you carry is not yours alone. Scholars before you carried it. I carry it. You will carry it forward. Do not mistake endurance for solitude." Micah finally nodded, though shame still burned. That night he slept in the corner of her office, books towering around him. The scent of paper was his blanket, the ticking of a radiator his lullaby. He woke before dawn, writing by lamplight so no one would know he had been there. Midterms had passed, but final papers now loomed. Micah chose to write on the philosophical implications of incompleteness, how Gödel's proof echoed not only through mathematics, but through human life. "Every system breaks," he wrote. "Every home falters. Every body fails. But within that failure lies freedom. We are not trapped in closed systems. We are invited to build beyond them." Yet even as the words emerged, his body betrayed him. Weeks of skipped meals, Nights without proper rest, long shifts sweeping classrooms. These carved hollows in his strength. One afternoon in Emerson Hall, as Helena lectured on Wittgenstein's later philosophy, Micah felt his vision dim. He tried to steady his notes, but the lines blurred. A rush of dizziness struck, and then darkness. He woke to murmurs. He was on the floor. Students gathered, Helena kneeling beside him. Her voice cut through the haze. "Micah, stay with us." Embarrassment surged stronger than pain. "I'm fine," he whispered, trying to rise. His knees buckled. Helena and another student steadied him. An hour later, in the infirmary, the doctor's verdict was simple: exhaustion, malnutrition. "You need rest and food," the doctor said firmly. "Books won't keep you standing if your body collapses." Micah stared at the ceiling. To fall like this in front of classmates, it was a humiliation deeper than hunger. Yet Helena, seated by the bed, only said quietly, "Now you know your limit. The question is not whether you fell. It is whether you rise with wisdom." That night, alone again, Micah opened his notebook. His hand trembled, but he wrote, "A theorem fails not because it is false, but because its frame is too narrow. My frame has broken. I must build a wider one." The page filled with fragments, memories of his mother's garden, the soil resisting but still giving a tomato, a bean, a leaf. He realized then that survival was not shameful. It was mathematics lived in flesh, continuity, not in perfection, but in persistence. When dawn touched the yard, Micah stepped outside. He still felt weak, but his breath rose white in the cool air, steady. The campus bells rang, and he whispered to himself, "I remain." By late April, spring at Harvard carried the scent of thawed earth and budding branches. The yard brightened with color, tulips pushing through soil as if to remind weary students that life renews itself. For Micah, strength returned slowly. Meals from Helena's kindness, stolen naps on the office couch, and sheer stubbornness stitched him back together. Yet whispers still followed him. Students had seen him collapse. Rumors of his poverty crept quietly through the halls. One afternoon, Helena announced a student symposium on the philosophy of mathematics. "A forum," she explained, "where you will present ideas, question one another, sharpen your thought." Her gaze rested briefly on Micah. "It will be an opportunity for voices less heard to be heard." The symposium gathered in a lecture room lined with blackboards. Rows of chalk equations from earlier classes framed the air with rigor. Students presented in turn, topics on constructivism, set theory, the limits of logic. Richard Alden sat near the front, posture flawless, his notes bound in leather. When Helena called for volunteers, Richard rose. His voice projected with ease. Hilbert's dream was noble, yes, but childish in its optimism. Gödel shattered it permanently. The only honest stance now is formalism, mathematics as symbol manipulation, free from metaphysical pretensions. To speak of meaning is poetry, not philosophy. He glanced toward Micah with a thin smile. And poetry is not proof. Polite applause followed. Then Helena asked quietly, "Micah, would you share?" He rose slowly, notebook in hand. His voice at first was low, but steadied with each word. Formalism claims that symbols need no meaning beyond their rules. But we must ask, why do rules matter? Why do humans create systems in the first place? Mathematics is not only a game, it is a mirror, not of objects, but of our longing to trust the world. He turned a page. Hilbert sought certainty. Gödel showed its limits. But meaning does not end where certainty ends. When I was a child, my mother planted beans in rocky soil. She knew many would fail. Yet she planted. The act itself carried meaning, hope, defiance, persistence. Mathematics, too, is this act. Even when incompleteness tells us perfection is impossible, the attempt itself nourishes us. A hush spread. Micah continued, stronger now. Consider the continuum hypothesis. It may be undecidable within our main set theory. Does that mean we abandon it? No. We study its consequences, explore its independence, expand the frame. Our limits do not end the conversation. They widen it. Richard laughed, sharp and dismissive. So mathematics is farming now? Romantic metaphors may charm, but they do not prove. Micah met his gaze. And yet, Richard, even your formalism grows from soil. Symbols mean nothing without people who choose to care. Proofs exist because human beings believe they matter. If you call that poetry, then perhaps poetry is the deeper proof. The room stirred. Some students nodded slowly. Others whispered. The guest lecturer present, Dr. Keating, tapped his pen thoughtfully. Mr. Cole has touched on an old truth. Mathematics may be formal, but the pursuit of it is profoundly human. To ignore that is to miss half the subject. Richard flushed but masked it with a cold smile. Sentiment will not solve open problems. No, Micah said gently, but it may keep us alive long enough to try. Helena ended the session before tension could rise further. Applause came, some polite, some genuine. Micah sat down, hands trembling. For the first time, he had spoken before peers without shrinking. He felt as if the oak tree in the yard had lent him its roots. Afterward, Helena found him in the corridor. You carried yourself well. Micah shook his head. I only spoke what I know. That is precisely why it mattered, she said. Richard argued with knowledge. You answered with life. Both are needed, but life is rarer. That night, Micah wrote in his notebook, Mathematics is proof, but also prayer. It is soil and stone, hunger and hope. It is the human act of refusing silence. He closed the book, the spring air drifting through the open window. The yard glowed with lantern light, tulips swaying. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a shift. Not triumph, not victory, simply a widening of space within him. A place where even incompleteness could feel whole. May arrived with sudden warmth, the trees in Harvard Yard exploding into green. Students sprawled on the grass with books, frisbees arcing across the open space, voices carrying like birdsong. For most, the season was ease after storms. For Micah, it was a new battlefield. Posters appeared on bulletin boards, colloquium on foundations of mathematics. Senior professors, graduate students, and select undergraduates would gather in Sanders Theater for public presentations. It was a stage both feared and coveted. Richard Alden had secured a prime slot. Word spread quickly. He would speak on the necessity of formalism in a post-Gödel world. Helena encouraged Micah to submit as well. Reluctantly, he did. When the schedule was posted, his name appeared immediately after Richard's. The weeks before the colloquium weighed on Micah like lead. He prepared between shifts, drafting arguments in his notebook while sweeping classrooms or stacking trays. He studied Hilbert's program, Gödel's proofs, Cohen's independence results. His nights were a blur of chalk dust and candlelight. Yet always at the heart of his notes, he returned to one line. Mathematics is the human act of refusing silence. The day arrived. Sanders Theater filled with rows of polished benches, the air heavy with expectation. Faculty in tweed and students in ties settled as Richard stepped to the podium. His slides gleamed with precision. He spoke with poise. The dream of certainty is gone. Hilbert's program lies in ruins. Gödel showed the futility of completeness. Thus, mathematics must be understood purely formally, as manipulation of symbols, free from illusions of meaning. To speak of human longing here is sentimentality, not scholarship. Applause followed, firm and confident. Richard bowed slightly, his eyes flicking toward Micah as if to say, "Now follow that." Micah rose. His coat was plain, his notebook worn. He carried no slides, only pages covered in cramped handwriting. At the podium, he looked out across the sea of faces. His heart hammered, but he began. "I am not from a family of scholars," he said quietly. "My mother taught me arithmetic with bottle caps at a kitchen table. To me, numbers were not abstractions. They were bread, wages, debts. Later, I learned they were also infinity, primes, and paradox, but I never forgot that they began as the rhythm of survival." He turned a page. Hilbert dreamed of completeness. Gödel proved its impossibility. Many say the dream is dead, but dreams do not die because they cannot be fulfilled. They live because they guide. Mathematics is more than symbol. It is promise. A murmur moved through the hall. Micah continued, stronger now. Consider the independence of the continuum hypothesis. It does not tell us the hypothesis is false. It tells us our system is too small. That discovery was not despair. It was expansion. Each incompleteness is an invitation to grow. He closed his notebook gently. If mathematics were only formal manipulation, no one would suffer for it or hope through it. Yet here we are, gathered because we believe it matters. I have known hunger, and still proofs kept me alive, because they whispered that the world could be understood, even when it was cruel. That is not sentiment. That is survival. Silence fell, deep and taut. Then slowly applause began. It spread, uneven at first, then swelling until the theater echoed. Some professors nodded gravely. A few students wiped at their eyes. Helena, seated near the front, did not clap. She only watched him with the quiet intensity of someone witnessing a seed break ground. Richard's jaw was set, his smile brittle. He gathered his notes, but the crispness of his victory had vanished. Afterward, in the corridor, Micah leaned against the wall, trembling from exhaustion. Helena approached. "You stood in the fire, and you did not burn." Micah shook his head. "I only spoke what I knew." "That," she said softly, "is why they heard you." That night, under the oak, Micah wrote, "Formalism may guard the rules, but meaning is what keeps us at the table. Without it, proofs are corpses. With it, they are bread." The lanterns of the yard flickered in the spring breeze. Micah closed his notebook, feeling the roots of his journey push deeper. The battle was not over, but for the first time, he believed he could endure it. June crept into Cambridge with heavy air and the scent of lilacs. The yard swayed with the nervous energy of finals. Students hurried between libraries and exams, their eyes tired but futures still unbroken. For Micah, the victories of the spring felt distant. Hunger gnawed again, exhaustion clung. But what struck hardest was a letter that arrived in a worn envelope, stamped with the mark of McDowell County, West Virginia. He tore it open beneath the oak tree. The handwriting was from an old neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, who had watched over him since his mother's passing. The words were blunt. His younger cousin, Clara, had collapsed from fever. With no health insurance and the nearest clinic 2 counties away, the family was desperate. They asked if Micah could send money, any amount at all. Micah's hands shook as he folded the letter. His savings amounted to coins in a jar, not enough even for train fare home. He pressed his forehead against the rough bark of the oak, whispering, "Why give me knowledge if I cannot help them?" The following days passed in blur. In the library, he stared at open pages of analysis and logic, but the symbols swam without meaning. During his shift sweeping the science center, chalk dust rose like smoke around him, but all he saw was Clara's thin face, imagined from the words in the letter. Helena noticed. After class, she drew him aside. "Something has struck you," she said. "You carry it like weight on your chest." Micah hesitated, then told her. The letter, the illness, the helplessness. His voice cracked. "I came here to learn, but what is the point if I cannot feed or heal the people I love?" Helena listened without interruption. At last she said, "Knowledge is not bread, but it can build the oven. You must finish what you began here. Do not abandon it out of guilt. Clara needs you strong, not broken." "But I cannot do nothing," Micah insisted. "I will send what I earn." He worked double shifts, saving every dollar. His meals shrank to crusts of bread and bitter coffee. At night, he returned to his notebook, scribbling thoughts that were half math, half prayer. One page read, "Every proof is a bridge. Perhaps one day I can build one wide enough to carry others across." Richard saw the toll. In the yard one afternoon, he sneered as Micah passed. "Your face looks thinner every week. Tell me, Cole, how long before the charity of professors runs out? Ideas cannot buy bread." Micah stopped. For once, he met Richard's eyes directly. "Bread fills the stomach. Ideas fill the years. Both are needed. One day you may learn which lasts longer." Richard scoffed, but there was unease in his glance. By the time finals ended, Micah had managed to send a small envelope of cash home. Mrs. Dalton wrote back weeks later. Clara's fever had broken. She was weak, but recovering. Micah read the letter again and again until the words blurred. Relief flooded him, though hunger still gnawed. That night, under the oak, he wrote, "Mathematics will not cure fever, but it can teach endurance. It tells me that even broken systems can extend, that even from scarcity there can be expansion. My family still lives, so I will keep sowing." The yard was empty, lanterns flickering in the summer dusk. Micah closed his notebook, pressed the gloves against his chest, and whispered into the night, "For Clara, for all of us, still waiting for light." The summer term at Harvard arrived with heat that pressed against the red brick walls. Many students left for internships or returned to family estates. The yard grew quieter, grass thick and green, paths shimmering under sunlight. For Micah, summer meant work. Without classes to anchor him, his days stretched into long shifts, mopping floors, moving boxes, collecting cans from bins that baked in the heat. At night he remained in the libraries, though the halls were emptier now. Widener's vast dome seemed cavernous with so few readers. Micah claimed a corner desk beneath a tall window and filled his notebook with thoughts on incompleteness and meaning. Yet his body weakened. Hunger had been his winter companion. Now it was joined by relentless heat and fatigue. Still, he pressed on. One evening, Helena found him in the library, head resting on folded arms, a page of scribbled notes half finished. She touched his shoulder gently. "You are burning both ends, Micah. Even the brightest flame needs fuel." He stirred. "I must stay ahead. If I do not, this place will swallow me." "You are already ahead," she said softly. "Not in wealth, not in ease, but in endurance. Do not mistake speed for strength." Helena invited him to join a summer seminar for advanced students. a discussion circle on set theory and the philosophy of infinity. Micah hesitated, but accepted. The first meeting was held in a small, sunlit room. Graduate students gathered, notebooks open, eager to impress. The topic, the continuum hypothesis and its independence. A tall graduate student presented with confidence, chalk striking the board in sharp lines. Cohen proved independence using forcing. Thus, the continuum hypothesis cannot be settled within standard set theory. For many, this ends the question. Helena turned to Micah. And for you? Micah rose slowly. His voice was quiet at first, then steadier. Independence does not end the question. It expands it. If our frame cannot decide, then we must seek a larger frame. The question itself remains a lantern, showing us where our walls are thin. A murmur ran through the room. One student challenged him, but why chase what cannot be caught? Micah answered, because the chase itself reveals new ground. When my mother planted in rocky soil, she knew many seeds would not grow, but the act of planting was discovery. Each sprout was proof that the ground held more than it seemed. Helena watched silently, her expression unreadable. The room quieted. Even the skeptical student looked down at his notes, as if reconsidering. Afterward, Helena spoke to Micah in the corridor. You are finding your voice, not only in writing, but in speech. Micah shook his head. I am only repeating what I know. That is all philosophy requires, Helena replied. To see clearly than to speak plainly. Still, not all was triumph. Richard returned from summer travel with renewed vigor. He confronted Micah outside the seminar. So now you preach philosophy as farming again? Careful, Cole. Professors may pity you, but pity does not last forever. Scholarship demands rigor, not sentiment. Micah held his gaze. Rigor without meaning is a shell. Meaning without rigor is wind. I am trying to hold both. Richard sneered, but his words faltered. He turned away, leaving Micah standing in the heat of the yard. That night, Micah wrote in his notebook, Independence is not defeat. It is invitation. To live with open questions is to accept that truth is larger than our walls. My own life is incomplete, but that incompleteness is the very space where hope survives. As the bells marked midnight, the yard lay quiet, lanterns glowing faintly. Micah closed his notebook, the summer air heavy on his skin. He whispered into the darkness, even in unfinished systems, I will keep building. August pressed down on Cambridge with air so thick it seemed to shimmer. The yard felt deserted, its lawns baked brown, its benches too hot for rest. Micah's days were a cycle of labor and study, his body worn thin, his mind kept alive only by the pulse of numbers and the words in his notebook. He lived half on bread, half on proofs. The summer seminar pushed harder. Professors asked sharper questions. Graduate students sparred with intensity. One afternoon, during a heated debate on Wittgenstein's later philosophy, Micah spoke of language as a bridge between minds. He explained that mathematics was not only about rules, but about shared trust. His words drew silence, then cautious respect. Yet Richard, ever present, muttered afterward, Trust does not solve theorems. The sting lingered, though Micah did not show it. Letters from home came rarely. In mid-August, one arrived that shook him. Clara, the cousin he had helped earlier, had relapsed. Doctors suspected her illness was deeper, requiring long treatment the family could not afford. The letter pleaded again, though gently. If Micah could send more, even a little, it might save her. Micah folded the paper slowly, pressing it flat as though doing so could press back despair. He had nothing left to send. His shifts had already been stretched to the edge. He whispered to himself in the dim library corner, "I am here to learn. But what is the use of knowledge if I cannot turn it into bread, into medicine?" The following days blurred. Hunger grew sharper, heat heavier. He pushed himself beyond exhaustion, scribbling late into the night. One evening, while walking across the yard with his bag of cans, dizziness overcame him. His vision fractured into shards of light. He staggered beneath the oak, then fell to his knees. When he awoke, Helena was there. She must have been searching for him, for her face hovered above, etched with worry. "Micah, you cannot keep doing this. Your body is breaking." He tried to speak, but his voice rasped. "If I stop, everything breaks. Clara needs me. My family needs me. I cannot fail them." Helena's eyes glistened. "And what of yourself? If you collapse completely, who will you help then? You cannot save others by destroying yourself." Her words struck, but Micah could not answer. The silence between them was filled only with the hum of cicadas. In the infirmary, the doctor warned again, "Malnutrition, dehydration, exhaustion." "You are burning through yourself," he said. "Another collapse could be worse." Lying on the narrow bed, Micah stared at the ceiling. His notebook rested beside him, but for the first time he did not reach for it. His thoughts felt heavy, as if even meaning was slipping away. He whispered to the empty room, "Perhaps Richard is right. Perhaps hope is only sentiment." Yet the next morning, Helena arrived with a folded page. She laid it on his chest. It was a copy of Hilbert's declaration, written in bold hand, "We must know, we will know." Beneath it, Helena had added her own line, "We must endure, we will endure." Micah touched the paper with trembling fingers. Slowly, almost against his will, he reached for his notebook. He wrote, "A theorem unfinished still points forward. My life is unfinished. That is why it must continue." That evening, though weak, he walked to the oak. The yard glowed faintly under lantern light. He sat against the trunk, notebook in his lap, and whispered into the night, "I am not done. Clara is not done. We are not done." September came with cooler winds. The yard shifted back to life as students returned, their voices bright with new beginnings. For Micah, the summer had left scars. His body was thinner, his face hollow, but within his eyes burned a steadier flame. He had fallen, and yet he still rose. That was its own proof. The autumn colloquium invited students to present research projects. Helena encouraged Micah to share his paper on incompleteness and meaning. At first he resisted. "They expect theorems, not prayers," he said. But Helena answered, "Sometimes the deepest theorems are prayers." Micah stood once more before an audience. His voice was calm, not loud. He spoke of Gödel, of Hilbert, of Cohen, but also of hunger, of failure, of persistence. He told them that mathematics was not only about what could be proven, but about living with what could not. He ended simply, "Theorems remind us that the world has structure. Incompleteness reminds us that the structure is not yet finished. Between them lies hope. That is where I live." Silence followed, then long applause. It was not the thunder of spectacle, but the deep sound of recognition. Among the faces, even Richard sat still, his usual smirk absent. For the first time, Micah felt not pity from his peers, but respect. Winter approached. Micah received word from West Virginia. Clara's health had stabilized. She was walking again, slowly, her laughter returning. Relief washed over him like warm rain. He wrote in his notebook, "Knowledge cannot heal directly, but it can carry us through the waiting until healing comes." Years later, after graduation, Micah returned to McDowell County. The mountains were the same, ridges shadowed in fog, valleys scarred by coal. Yet he returned not with wealth, but with books. He rented a vacant church hall and turned it into a small classroom. Children from the hollow came, barefoot and shy, their eyes wide at the sight of chalk and blackboards. Micah taught them arithmetic with bottle caps, just as his mother once had. He told them, "Numbers are not only for counting money, they are for counting days, for counting blessings, for counting hope." Helena visited once, years older, her step slower but her eyes still bright. She sat at the back of the hall watching children raise hands, watching Micah smile gently as he guided them through puzzles. When the class ended, she said quietly, "You have built your own Hilbert's program, not of proofs, but of people." Micah laughed softly. "Incomplete, as all programs are, but alive." Outside, the mountains caught the evening sun, glowing gold. Children ran along the dirt road, their voices carrying through the valley. Micah stood at the doorway, notebook in hand. On the last page, he wrote, "Every number is a promise. Every promise is a seed. Even in rocky soil, some seeds will grow." He closed the book, lifted his face to the fading light, and whispered, "We must sow. We will sow." This story is dedicated to those who have carried heavy burdens in silence, the farmers, the workers, the orphans, the forgotten, and still kept a flame of learning alive in their hearts. To every elder who once believed knowledge could be a lamp for their children, and to every child who studies by dim light, hoping to honor that faith, this belongs to you. I thank the readers who walked patiently through these chapters, breathing with Micah in the cold of Harvard Yard, enduring hunger, doubt, and trial, and arriving with him at a place of forgiveness and renewal. And I thank the teachers who, like Helena, have offered not only books but also warmth, showing that true scholarship is not measured by brilliance alone, but by kindness. May these words serve as a small hearth in winter, a reminder that even in incompleteness, hope survives and seeds can grow in the hardest soil.